Secret Circle.
Welcome to The Secret Circle with me, Dr. Luke Deckard, the podcast where I chat with authors, filmmakers, musicians, and more about the art of their craft and let you in on some of their secrets. Today's guest is author Lauren North, and today she's going to let you in on some of her secrets as an author and as a podcast host and all sorts of stuff. So without further ado, let's bring on Lauren. Lauren, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Luke.
That's my
I'm
pleasure.
slightly concerned with the knowledge of secrets because I have such a big mouth and I'm so chatty that I don't actually think I have any secrets, but I will do my best for you.
It's all good. One of the questions I like to start off with all my writery friends is I'm always interested in why someone has decided to write, why they write stories, why they feel the need or the compulsion to tell stories in whatever way they do it. So that's the first question for you. Why do you write?
I really love that question, and I was listening to your podcast in advance, and I knew that question was going to come up. And it's really the first sort of time I'd really thought about it, and I think it dates back to childhood when I had, and I still have, a very dark imagination, and I would spend a lot of time worrying about terrible things happening, like being kidnapped and having soldiers invade our home, just like the most random things, like a tree falling on our house. But because of my imagination, it wasn't like I would just worry about that stuff. I would then go on and then this would happen, and then this would happen. And I started almost having to tell myself a story that then made it all okay, like in the end. Oh, but then this would come in and it would all be okay. And so I think in order to combat the dark imagination, I started telling myself stories from a really young age, like really, really young. And I think it just grew from there, that I then would write things down and it just went from there, really. And I can't stop now.
I love that. What do you think is the the root of this dark imagination that you had as a kid?
I have no idea, but I still have it now. Like every time the kids leave the house, I'm like, oh, there's going to be a crash on the bus and I'm going to have to go and rescue them, or like,
Yep.
you know, a plane's going to drop out of the sky. Like it's just endless. And it is a case of actually now writing my fictional stories and my books is a really great way to focus that creative energy on something that isn't basically my mind doom scrolling my imagination. So
Right. I love that. So that's quite funny. Like, so are you like one of those people who have those thoughts of like you're on the tube, or you're on the tube platform and you're like, what happens if like someone pushes someone in front of the train,
yes,
or pushes me,
exactly.
or
Or I
I
push
fall, or yeah, you nudge someone and they fall, or you
yeah, if I
actually push
them, if I
someone.
don't like that person. Yeah, and also like, so I live in quite a rural area and I'm often out running alone. And I'm always thinking, what if I find this dead body in a ditch,
Yeah.
or there's a van that passes me. There's obviously delivery vans everywhere, but like a van passes me and I spend about 20 minutes trying to recall like every detail about the van and the license plate, because it's going to be useful when the police knock on my door and say, did you see this van?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's quite tiring, I would say, being in my head.
Yeah, no, I mean that, to have that level of darkness going on, but it is good. It's good. It's fun. It fuels the imagination, like you say, which I think is, I think a lot of writers, well, all writers need that. And I don't think people always like, oh, where do these ideas come from? Blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, well, it's just your imagination. You just run with all this kind of stuff and you have fun with it. Okay, so growing up, you have this dark imagination. What are your like literary influences growing up? Were you a big reader as a kid, or were you not?
I think we all were, weren't we? Like, I don't think I've ever spoken to an author who, oh, you're about to
I
pop my
wasn't.
bubble, aren't you? Oh, were you not? That's so interesting. So how did you get in? You must have started reading before you started writing. So how did you get into
Yes.
reading? What
There
age
was
were you?
the saying that I must have started reading before I started writing is funny, because I remember there was this kid on my MA program several years ago who was going around telling everyone he was really proud because he'd never read a book,
Oh my God,
and I
that
was
is
like,
not to be proud of.
no, it's not. And I'm like, I don't believe you, and B, don't be proud of that. I guess I did read as a kid a little bit. I just I for there were times I had like really bad dyslexia. So as a kid, it was hard for me to read and pay attention and comprehend and things like that. So I soaked up a lot of storytelling from certain TV shows like Star
Brilliant.
Trek, or Columbo, or things like that. I watched a lot of different things that really influenced me. Um, But I read a little bit as a kid. You know, I read Chronicles of Narnia. I read as a preteen. I read Lord of the Rings.
Wow. I
You
mean, I've
know,
tried several times and never got
it
past the
was
first
tough.
page.
It was tough. It was tough. I'm not gonna lie. And then I started reading a little bit more as a late teen, and that's kind of more where I fell more in love with the idea of storytelling. But like, one of my favorite shows growing up was Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and I would write fan fiction and things like that with it. So I would, I wasn't just like kind of mindlessly watching TV. I was looking at it, engaging with the stories, and then wanting to tell stories myself. So yeah, so from a young age, I read a little bit, but it was very, trying at times. But then I've been just sort of found my way forward to kind of read, and I've been a big reader since probably since about 19, I say 18, 19. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, so
yeah, your
I
influence.
did. I did read really early on. I was always quite proud of what the early reader books that you would get given. You were like the next level up.
Yeah.
I have two older brothers, and we're really all close in age, but it was them together. Like they're 1 year apart, and then I was like 2 years later. So it
Okay.
was almost, there was a little bit of only child feelings in growing up because it was
Yeah.
always them and it was always me. So I always disappeared into stories and I would take them with me. Like my mum worked full time. And so we were every holiday we were in like a day camp, like constantly, like for the duration.
Yeah.
And I would just take a book with me. I would take Enid Blyton and I would take Nancy Drew and
Yeah.
I would just sit in the corner and then they'd say to my mum at pick up, she's just sat and read all day. And my mum was like, yeah, so what? But then in my mind, there wasn't really a huge YA genre when I was growing up. Like there was
Hmm.
Judy Blume. And I read all of her books really early on. And then I just went from Judy Blume to Stephen King and John Grisham at the age of 11. Like it
Yeah.
was just, oh yeah, done that. I think because my stepdad at the time was reading them from the library, so I would just pick them up. I just pick anything up. So I was reading like Dean Koontz horror books and Stephen King's Pet Sematary and Misery and terrifying myself. So I don't think that's obviously added to all the darkness.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I
I
also ferociously love Marion Keyes as well, I should say. So I read like lots of different genres.
Yes. No, I love that. That's interesting that you say that, when you were growing up, there really wasn't kind of there wasn't a clear YA section in the
No.
bookstores really. Do you think, because when I was, growing up and when I was reading a little bit and all that kind of stuff, like not having such harsh distinction between this is YA, this is adult, do you think sometimes can that be more helpful for a kid, or do you think that like kids shouldn't read a certain adult books or adult fiction, or do you think like everything is fair game, it just depends on the maturity of the child?
Yeah, I think everything's fair game. And I think reading a little bit beyond what you're capable of and what maybe your maturity level is at is
Yeah,
also expanding you. So if you
yeah,
always only read in the comfortable little bracket you've been given, then you're just in the pool of things you already know that you're comfortable with and that makes
yeah,
sense to you. And so expanding that is it's great. It's great. My son's just reading a YA fantasy, which I know is a little bit too much for him with regards to some of the storylines, but I'm just letting him go for it because he's reading, he's not playing on the Xbox, which to me is like such a win. So
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Do you want to name the book that he's reading? I'm
Yes,
curious.
in fact, and I read it on holiday and I gave it to him. So I'm the terrible mother who gave it. It's Fourth Wing, which I think
Okay.
obviously loads of people have read, and I
Yes.
did really love it. And it's really going to make me read a lot more fantasy. Absolutely loved it, and yeah, he's reading that now.
Nice, nice. So yeah, I really relate to that because we're having these same conversations with my wife with about our daughter. We had a little baby girl about 7 months ago,
Oh,
and I'm
congratulations!
thank you. And she's wonderful, and I'm like I want to expose her to everything from a young age. Like I remember being a kid, and again because I watched a lot of stuff. I remember watching RoboCop at the age of like 7,
Yeah,
and
me too.
the funniest story with RoboCop for me is that like A, he's sitting right behind me, but but B, I somehow convinced my parents are, conservative Christian people who live in the States. I somehow convinced them to buy me an R-rated movie and let me watch it alone upstairs in my room at the age of like 8, which
Yeah.
I just found hilarious. And I think when I think back, I'm like, I don't know how I accomplished that. I don't.
They probably just wanted an evening to themselves.
They did probably, and I was up there happily watching these people get like viciously,
Yes.
shot up
Yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
I can one up you because I watched Stephen King's It at the age of 7 with my
oh, there you
brothers
go.
who were only like 9 and 10. And so
Yes,
I don't know what my mum was thinking because I still can't look down a drain even
yes,
now. So
yes.
yeah, I don't know sometimes what our parents were thinking. So I won't
No,
worry
I
so much
don't
about
either. But I
what
think it's good
books.
though. I think it's good. I think exposing again, it really does depend on the kid and you can gauge that. But I'm like, I think sometimes it's good to let them go just a little bit beyond, or sometimes a light year beyond what they're
Yeah.
what they're ready for, depending on the circumstances. Um, so when did you first fall in love with like the art and the craft of storytelling? When did you're reading a lot as a kid, but when were you like, I want to tell my stories?
Really young. Like
Nice.
I was writing in notebooks from maybe 7 years old, I think. I would like then construct these stories. They were all quite horror, actually. I think often involved like hands shooting out of walls in spooky
Very
places.
Stephen Kingy.
Yeah, well, it was, yeah. And I would like go downstairs and I'd be like, I read the story out to my parents who were probably like, oh my God, I've got to sit through another story. Um, yeah, and I did that a lot when I was younger. And then I don't know when and why it happens, but I think it's really common that you hit your teenage years and
Mm.
you just forget, or you just have other things you want to do. And part of it might be that we're doing our GCSEs and that like takes up so much time. But I don't remember writing anything during those teenage years. And then it was only when I'd finished university and got a job in an office, which was the worst thing I could ever have done, and realized how awful it was, that I was like, well, I'll just write a book instead. And I don't know why I thought that I could do that, having not written anything since a kid and probably wasn't very good at it. But I was like, right, I'll just write a book. And so I would go into work like quite early and send a few emails to make it look like I'd been in and was working. And then I just write for hours. And I just loved it. It just gave me such an escape from a job I didn't really like. So I'm always grateful for that. But the hilarious thing is that I really thought I was the next Marion Keyes. I was just so confident that the second I sent the submissions out to agents, I would be snapped up. I would be rich and famous. I had obviously no idea. And it was back in the day where you had to print out
Oh
submissions
God,
and
yeah.
post them, which was like so long ago. But yeah, I realized maybe in my mid 20s that I had to learn the craft of writing, that it
Hmm.
was one thing to be able to understand the flow of a story and the structure of a story with the beginning, the middle, and the end, and have all those beats that you hit. And it was an entirely different thing to be able to construct that story into flowing dialogue that would be interesting
Mhm.
and would be engaging. And so I sort of set upon the task of, when I was reading, actually looking at how sentences were structured in stories. And I didn't do a course, I just sort of decided I would learn, and
Hmm.
eventually got better and better, and the rejections didn't hurt quite so much. They were a bit more personal. So it
Yes.
took still quite a while, but I got there.
Nice, nice. Do you remember what some of those early stories were? And are they anything that you ever like went back and revisited or wanted to? Or
No, but they were all I started in romance
Mhm.
actually. And so the first story was a basically an autobiographical story. Like I think that's really common. And it was
Yes.
about a single girl in London who was on the dating scene. Like in my head, it was just like Sex in the City for the modern age. It
Right.
was dire. I should hasten to add, and definitely needs to be burnt. I
Mm.
think I've still got a copy in the loft just for like ha ha ha's.
Yes.
But then actually the second book I wrote is called The Reluctant Celebrity, and that was self-published, and I published self-published the next one after that, which was another romance. And I started to get reviews and started to get better at sort of that point. So
Mm.
yeah.
That's interesting because what's so fascinating to me is that you mentioned that that your romance book that you self-published is I keep, talking to my writer friends, and they all start letting it slip. Oh yeah, no, self-published a couple of these books early on. Da, 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 da. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't think people really, like, the wider public don't realize how many authors have self-published one or two or three books before they then found their agent and started doing traditional publishing.
Yeah, and change their name
Yeah, and change their name
several
indeed
times over.
several
Um,
times.
Yeah, and I think I with the Reluctant Celebrity, it was right in just as Kindle was taking off.
Cool.
And so it was a huge it actually did really well in the
Mm,
Kindle charts. I was really happy. And I just was like, oh, this is so easy. I just
yes,
will do this
yes,
now. But then by the time I'd written the next one, everybody had caught on and caught up,
yes,
and it was a lot harder,
yeah,
and in fact impossible, I found, to be seen. And this was, again, it's weird, like, this was then before Facebook advertising and
yeah,
Amazon advertising. Like, how were you ever seen at that time? So yeah, but I mean, I always knew I wanted to be traditionally published. I
mm,
always had that focus and dream of getting an agent and getting a publishing deal. So
yeah, yeah. So let's chat about that journey then. So you've self-published some stuff. You're thinking, okay, I want the traditional publishing under my belt. What was I'm assuming you started with an agent hunt, or were you approaching publishers directly? What was your route?
well, at the time, so I feel like I'm saying at the time a lot because it was so long ago, like I feel really old now. But
How long ago was this? Put a date on this.
oh gosh, it would have been 2016, 2017.
That's not that long ago.
No, it feels like so much has happened since then, I
It
think.
does.
So I moved from romance to women's fiction
Mhm.
without really thinking about it. I think just that I'd grown up a bit, I'd got married, I'd had two small children, and I didn't want to write a boy meets girl. I wanted to write about women and friendship. So
Mm,
I wrote a book called One Endless Summer, which was about a group of girls in their early 20s who travel the world because one of them's got a brain tumor, and she's followed around. It's a documentary's being made, and there's a cameraman following them around. And I was getting some like all maybes from agent, but nothing, and it was
yeah.
very frustrating. And then a publisher called Karina, I think it was bought by HarperCollins,
Mm,
and but they had their own imprint that you could submit to directly. So I submitted to them, and they took me on for a 2-book deal, which was One Endless Summer and then Ours is the Winter. So I wrote these 2 women's fiction books, and I was still thinking, I'm not where I want to be. I still want my agent. But
mm,
I really appreciate having had that experience with what was then HQ Digital, because it taught me so much about publishing and the industry. And I think it stripped away some of the naivety I had about
mm.
publishing and money
Yeah.
with
What did
publishing.
you learn? What were, like, the main things that you were learning along the way with this?
I think one of the things I learned was that it doesn't matter how good the book is, to some extent. Like, I think a lot of success comes from a publisher marketing and pushing, and sometimes a book will be amazing and it will take this like a snowball effect and it'll be amazing with no marketing. But 99% of the time, a publisher is really pushing a book for it to be seen enough to then have that snowball effect in some respect.
Mm,
And so, but that was great for me. I suddenly realized that I just needed to get to a publisher who would like put the marketing behind me, like, okay, we can
yeah.
do that. So I feel like I learned so much about the process of editing as well, and structural edits and what that meant. It was the first time I'd sort of gone through the process of all the different ways you then get to from your manuscript to the finished manuscript.
Yeah. Can I ask you a
um
question about that actually?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
there's something else there was someone on I think it was on Twitter the other day, was saying something about how, like, they don't ever show their manuscript to anyone other than, like, their agent or their publisher.
I saw that. I was like, you
Nuts.
nutter.
It's absolutely nuts because when it comes to, like, yes, when you get traditionally published, you often have structural edits, line edits, and things like that. But those things can also happen really early on in your
Yeah,
writing process if you're working with other writers who are on a similar or slightly above your level, they can kind of help raise you up a little bit. Um, so I'm interested in sort of your experience of learning about the function and the importance of structural edits, because I can't tell you how many times I've, especially like when I've done like some teaching and stuff like that, where I've read some stuff, or from a student, or and they think they've just done the perfect thing, but they've only done one draft. And I'm like, this, like, structurally this doesn't quite work, and they're like, but it's great, it's fine, it's like, no, like, there's cool ideas here, but there's a structure, and there's a structure for a reason. So yeah, I mean, tell me about your experience with learning about structure with maybe one of the books they were working on and how it helped.
Well, I think I learned quite early on about structural edits,
Mm,
in that with One Endless Summer, the first women's fiction, that was when I was really starting to take myself a bit more seriously. I wasn't getting anywhere. And so I paid for it to be structural edited.
yeah.
And I think that was the first time I'd had it done, and it just showed me like how much you can see of a story. But it
Mm,
also showed me that not everything someone tells you, even if they're an editor, is right. Because
true.
I then changed something massive at the end, and the publisher, when I got one, then was like, "Oh, you need to change that back." So it is really interesting. So even if you're being told by someone with loads of experience to do something, it's really important to really think about your story and what you want from it. So I learned that one as well. But I really think having beta readers of all types is really important. And when I first started writing, it was my mum and my auntie Pauline would read my books.
Nice.
Thanks, guys. And now I'm really fortunate to have a really close circle of writing friends, and we share quite a lot of our work. So I've asked them, they're going to read the first 10,000 words of the new book I'm writing this week over the weekend, because it's going to my agent next week. So
Mm,
they're going to be the first ones to see it. And I just really value their feedback and support. So it's really important, I think, to get different viewpoints in, and to hear what other people are thinking. Because I was explaining this yesterday actually
mm,
to someone, that when I write, I plan a lot. So in my head, the story's completely set, and it's almost a film. Like
uh,
it's every scene is there. So I can't see it's wrong, like, because it's in my head, that's what's happening. So
right.
I can't then see until someone else sort of points it out. Have you thought that maybe this character shouldn't behave like that? They should behave like this. And then I think, yeah, no, you're right. So I think you can't see the wood from the trees sometimes. And I'm certainly guilty of that. So it's really important to take on loads and loads of feedback.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I think feedback is such an important thing. It always baffles me when, like I said, when someone is like, "Oh no, I don't let anyone read my work." I'm like, Why not? Like, I don't."
Yeah, it's hard, and it's embarrassing as well. I think when you're really first starting out, you feel like you're really putting yourself out there, putting
Yeah,
a part of yourself out there.
yeah.
So that's really hard. I do appreciate it's hard.
Yeah, it is. So okay, so let's, because you started publishing through what was HQ
Hard.
Digital origin,
Yeah.
a
Mhm.
while back, and then you're like, no, I want to find the agent. I want to talk about the agent hunt, because that's always a really interesting journey, and sometimes really difficult. What do you think? What were the highs and lows of trying to nab an agent? And what do you think the role, and the importance of having an agent is?
So it is a lot of lows in searching for an agent. Like, I think in some respects, I was quite fortunate that I started my submissions at the age of 23,
Mm,
and had had a good decade of rejections. So that when I was then submitting my books that were slightly better, that I was hoping for more from, and I was getting rejections, I was like, oh yeah, okay, well, this is what happens.
yeah,
So I think I didn't take it too personally. But agents are so important. But what's more important than an agent is the right agent for you,
yeah,
because you have to find an agent who has time for you,
yeah,
who is in your corner no matter what, who is going to push you to be the best writer you can possibly be,
yeah,
and challenge you and sell your books.
yeah.
And um,
Yes.
all those things are important. And it's very, very hard for someone who is submitting to lots of agents, who are so desperate for an agent, and I've been there and I know, to accept the fact that actually there are wrong agents for you out there, and it's better to have no agent than to have the wrong agent. I believe, because the wrong agent can just hold you back in your career.
Yeah. Let's say there's someone listening and they're thinking, "Oh my god, yeah, I definitely don't like my agent." Um what's the advice you think you would give to someone who has an agent they don't really feel is on their side? What should they do?
Mm. That's really, it's really hard, and I don't want to give like a blanket bit of advice
Mm,
to someone without understanding all the ins and out, because it might be that that author just needs to meet with the agent face to face and have a
mm,
proper conversation and a planning session and make sure they both are on the same page. And it can just be a case of communication. And because
yeah,
we feel like we're taking up their time and they're so busy and we don't want to be
yeah,
a burden, we can sometimes not, they might not even know something's wrong. And until
yeah.
you have that conversation, they're not going to know. So it's difficult to say, oh, yeah, we just leave and find another one, because it's really hard. It's so easy to say, and it's
Yes,
really hard. So
yes.
I think always my first advice is always communication, and
Yeah,
see where you're feeling. Trust your instincts, but
sure, yeah.
be sure that you are on the same page.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with you with that. Um so your first couple of books were, like I said, were self-published. There were some you were doing some romance stuff, but then you started moving into a little bit more of the crimey side of writing. Talk to me about that movement. How did you go from romance, Sex in the City kind of stuff to like I'm gonna
Well,
write this twisted tale?
Well, it was a progression. So it went
Mm.
romance, women's fiction. And then I don't think I ever thought to myself, oh, psychological suspense, that's where I'm going. It was very much, and I remember it so vividly, when an idea for this book came along. And it felt to me like a knock at the door.
Yeah.
And there standing on the doorstep were all these characters who had a story to tell.
Mm.
And that story became She Says She's My Daughter, which was actually only published last year, but I wrote that in, I think, 2018, and it was the first
Oh wow.
psychological suspense I'd written. And that book got me an agent,
Mm.
but we had offers from publishers, but we didn't have the offer that I wanted as my next step in my career. And
Mm.
again, with like saying it's the right agent, it's also the right publisher and the right publishing
Yes.
deal.
Yes.
And at the time, I had just almost finished The Perfect Betrayal.
Hmm.
And I was so passionate. You're always passionate about the one you're writing. I was like, right, let's
Yes.
not take these deals. My mum was like, what? You've now been offered a traditional deal, you're not taking it. I was like, no, we're going to focus on this book instead. And it went out to sub like literally maybe 3 months later. And I was so fortunate to then have Transworld took it on, and The Perfect Betrayal became my debut. And America took it on as well. It was I had 2 books out in America, which was
Yes.
fantastic. So it was fun. It was such the right decision, which was brilliant. And
Yes.
then, but so nice as well to have the first book come out in 2023. So yeah.
Yes, yes. So I'm curious, and if you don't want to give too much like detail away, that's absolutely fine. But I'm interested. I think other people would be too. Like, what was the deal that you were looking for the first book, and why? What was it that were like, these aren't the right deals for me? Because I think sometimes people I've seen it quite a lot where someone just like they've jumped on an agent and they've jumped on a deal, and that deal has really bitten them in the ass because they just didn't realize what they were doing. And I'm like, then they're just like floundering for afterwards. So I think it's important. I guess the importance of this is like it's fine to like maybe take a step back and really assess this deal. But what was it that wasn't working for you, and why you wanted to wait? Without going into gritty detail if you don't want to,
That's
obviously.
fine. No, I'm happy to share. And I think it's really important in hindsight
Mm,
to look at the publisher as a whole and the
yeah.
authors who are with that publisher and that imprint,
Yes.
and maybe look at how happy they are and reach out and ask them a few questions and get a sense of a broader sense of how well you will be treated or you might be treated. It
Yeah.
is really difficult because at every publisher and every imprint, and I've been with quite a few now, you are going to get really happy authors and ones who aren't happy for various reasons. So
Yeah.
you have to really look at the whole spectrum. But for me at the time, I believed, and to some extent I possibly still believe this, that the advance you are offered from a traditional deal is a promise to how much they are going to invest in your book and your marketing and your career.
Sure.
And in the first deal I was offered, I didn't feel that they were promising me they were going to do enough. And so I wanted to wait and see if I could get more
Sure.
advanced and therefore a bigger promise. So
Yeah.
that was the reason, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
I
Like,
think that's
makes
totally
me sound,
valid.
I'm not, it wasn't like a greedy, I just want more money. It was like,
No.
well, what does this mean? What,
Mm.
what if this is your budget, what's that going to look like? And I just wanted
Yes.
to make sure I was making the right decision from that
Yeah.
perspective.
I really I respect that, because I think that's totally valid. Yeah, there's so many times where you do come across, writers and the advance that they've been given or not given, and it's just royalties only, and it's just like, then they have no marketing, and they're like, oh, I wish people would market, but they're not market. It's just I totally get that. Wanting that investment from the publisher is a big deal. And again, I think there are a lot of times where people will just jump on that first deal because they're just so excited to get published that they don't like think through those particular aspects, I think.
Yeah, although I do feel like my understanding and the industry itself has developed quite a lot since 2018, in the sense that there are so many more publishers now that you can submit to directly that don't
Yes.
offer an advance, but you are seeing authors making a fantastic living
Yes. Oh,
through
true.
those books. So I just wouldn't say it all comes down to advance anymore.
No.
And there's loads of publishers who are doing amazing things without offering advances now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's total. I agree with you that as well, because yeah, you can go with an indie publisher who they might have really interesting marketing styles that can get your book seen, and you might not get a mass you might not be getting a huge advance, but yeah, I totally agree with that. There really, that's the fun thing about publishing, I guess, and the scary thing is there really isn't a one size fits all. And
No.
yeah, I mean, sometimes you might want to go with a small indie publisher, or sometimes you might want to try and aim for one of the biggers. Uh, but yeah, it's always a mixed bag. So
Yeah.
back to writing psychological thrillers.
Yes.
I'm interested to know who, you mentioned you read a lot of Stephen King growing up and things like that, but was there a particular author, psychological thrilling author, that you were like, oh my god, I love this person's work, this is what I want to do? Who is that, and what was that book?
So there's possibly three authors
Nice.
who I think I read within quite a short space of time,
Mm,
but I think around 2018, who really changed my understanding of what I wanted to achieve and really made me want to push myself a lot more.
mm,
And one of those was an author called Louise Beach. She
mm,
wrote a novel called How to Be Brave.
mhm.
And I just cannot sing its praises enough in the beauty of the writing and the story. And it's just so special and so beautiful that I read it and I just thought, I need to up my game
Yeah,
in what I'm giving into
yeah.
these books. So I read that, and I'm really fortunate now that I've been such a fangirl of Louise Beach that I've stalked her enough that we're now friends, which is lovely. And we even shared a book launch together in March
Nice.
last year, which was really special. It's just perseverance, people, with
Exactly.
your friendships. And the
You will be my
second one
friend.
yeah, no choice. The second one was an author called Essie Lines, and she wrote a book called Valentina,
Okay.
who I am also now friends with, and is Susie to me. And Valentina was a psychological suspense,
Mm,
and it was so beautifully crafted in the story, but in also the language. And Susie's such a talented writer, and that really pushed me to want to give more. And then the third one was BA Paris, Behind Closed Doors. I
ah,
just absolutely loved it. The tension in that book and the twists just made me gasp. And I thought, right, this is what I want to be doing to my readers. So those
yeah.
three books, I read them all within a really similar space of time. And I think together I sort of decided, like, come on, we can do better.
Yes. I love that. I mean, I mean, you finding those authors that inspire you to up your game is such an important thing. Um, let's talk a little bit about some of your upcoming books, because you have two coming out this year, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I have three
Kind of
coming out this year.
three. Oh,
Three. I have
geez.
three. Well, I have the paperback of The Ugly Truth from last year has just come out. Came out
Okay,
last week. But
right.
other than that, I have three other books coming out this year.
Right. So, okay, I'm aware of The Teacher's Secret and Clickbait. What's this mystery third one that I don't know
The
about?
mystery third one, I'm not allowed to share the title yet, but it's another psychological thriller, and it's out on the 18th of July. So I can't
Okay,
tell you
okay.
anything about it yet, but I will be able to soon. A cover is coming apparently. So yeah, really excited about it. I've just finished writing it in December. So yeah, The Teacher's Secret is coming out in February. And that is my Lauren North brand. That is my psychological thrillers.
Mhm.
And it's the story of a teacher and her 8-year-old son who are living in a very beautiful, very quiet village in the Suffolk countryside. And they disappear on their walk home from school, and nobody knows what's happened to them and whether it was foul play or not.
Mm.
And a substitute teacher comes into the village to take over the class and starts to realize that everyone in this village and this school has a secret.
Right.
So it's quite a fun. I enjoyed writing it. It's got 4 points of view. It's got like some really awful
Yeah.
characters in it. I really wanted to write some unlikable characters for this book, and I think I achieved that. So you've got
Nice.
like a really busybody neighbor who spies on everybody, and you've got a really selfish teacher who just thinks everything should be coming her way and not to anyone else. So I really enjoyed the process of writing that one. So yeah, that's coming out in February.
Nice.
And then, yeah, Clickbait, which is my LC North brand, that is
Yes.
coming out in April. Really excited about that. It is all told, again, like The Ugly Truth, it's told through transcripts and mixed media. And it's the
Mm.
story of the Lancaster reality TV family, who are like the world's most famous reality TV family, and what happens to them when a video emerges of one of their parties from 20 years ago before they were famous,
Mm.
and a teenager who disappeared the night of that party.
Wow.
And it's all told through the investigation of a podcaster, a YouTuber who's sort of this really cool guy who is almost wanting to be famous himself a bit. So there's a bit of
Right.
conflict there. And he knows the family as well. So it was just so much fun to write. I got to write all the detail of like what the antics his family got up to in the reality TV shows and what people thought about them. It was just so much fun.
Awesome. Let's talk a little bit about just with some restraints, The Teacher's Secret, and then we'll talk a little about Clickbait as well.
Yeah.
But not too much detail, because we don't want to spoil anything.
Well, I was just thinking, I don't know if I can remember much about it, because I've written like a few more books since then. So I'm like, I don't know what else I
So
can
long
tell you
ago,
anyway.
things happened. I'm interested in the process. So this, you said, had four different points of view, and you're
Yes.
diving into different people's perspectives and whatnot. What was that writing process like, and what was different about that book from maybe your others?
Well, the difference was the number of points of view. And
Mm.
so I've never written a book with 4 points of view before. And I had so much fun doing it and crafting the different voices.
Mm.
But I'm not sure how. I worry that maybe it's too many. Like, I'm not used to writing 4. Like, I'm used to writing 2.
Yeah.
And so I worry that 4 is going to be a bit overwhelming. So, I don't know if you feel this, but there's always like this fear. Like,
Yeah.
when you used to sit an exam, you'd come out and you'd be like, oh, I nailed that.
Yeah.
And then towards the closer you get to the results day, like, oh, I don't think
Like,
I've
oh
even
crap.
passed. And I think it's the same with books. Like, I wrote it and I loved it. I'm
Yeah.
so happy with it. And then just getting closer and closer to publication, I'm like, oh, but what if people don't like that there's 4 points of view? And I mean, I just think it's quite fun, and it's quite a quick read that way,
Yeah.
because you're jumping from one person to another, and you
Totally.
don't quite know how all the story is going to connect between the characters, and then it does. And it was really fun to sort of weave that all together.
Yeah. What was the most challenging aspect of weaving these four stories, these 4 points of view together?
I think one of the things that's really important when you have more than one character is to recognize that each main character has to have their own story,
Mhm.
their own motivations, and their own ending.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges was finishing one character's whole story and ending and the reasons that they are in the book without giving away the ending that
Right.
you're about to have with the twist. So that
Right.
was challenging. That took a couple of rewrites, I will tell you.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's just really important to make sure that your characters are earning their place in the novel
Yeah.
always.
Yeah. And on a maybe a research question side, like what did you do in terms of how do you go about researching for a novel? You said it takes place in Suffolk? Where did you say?
Which is where I live, in the
Where
village
you live?
next door to mine, in fact. So
Ah,
there was not much research required in terms of location.
yes.
The school presented itself with some interesting points because there's a reviewer
Mm,
who I really admire. Her name's Vic, and she is Little Miss Book Lover, I think is her tagline. And she reads all my books, and she is a teacher. So I was very aware when
right.
I was writing the book that she is a teacher and she was going to read it. So I really wanted to make sure that I was presenting this the politics of the school and the school playground as best as I could. And
Right.
fortunately, I am someone who I'm a volunteerer. It's like a disease. You sort of say yes to things that you don't really want to say yes to. And so I was always in my kids' primary school helping them with the
Right.
readings. And I was chair of the PTA. And
Yeah.
I was the one with the clipboard in the playground. So I had quite a lot of experience of just seeing and watching teachers interact with pupils and each other and staff rooms.
Yeah.
So I was quite fortunate that it didn't require too much research. In fact, that particular story.
Yeah, no, that's good. Okay, let's chat about clickbait then, because that's obviously slightly different. And by
Yeah.
slightly, I mean massively, because you're doing it through transcripts, you're doing it through a podcast host, you're doing it through various forms of media. What was that? What was the process like of writing this book?
Hard, really quite hard because there are three different storylines, a time frame. So there is what happened 20 years ago to this missing teenager. That's the
Mm,
mystery that is running through the core of the book. And then you've got the present day with the podcaster trying to interview this reality TV family who are just beyond famous.
mm,
And then in between those 2 points, you have the start of the reality TV series and everything that happens to this family up until the present day. And that is, you have to weave that all in because I can't just tell you that they're really famous and they've had a reality
yeah,
TV show for the last 15 years. I need to show you what that reality TV show looked like. And I need to
yeah,
tell you that they went on this cruise and it was like Brits abroad and all the
yeah,
nuts things that happened to them. And so it was a case of making sure that I was delivering on those three elements without losing the storyline and
mm,
without losing the pace and the excitement and the mystery and wanting people to want to know what happened to this boy who no one has seen for 20 years.
right. And like because you said just going through like different you're exploring different medias through it. Did you watch a lot of like YouTube investigators and things like that? What did you learn from that process?
Yeah, just a way of talking, I think, and a lot of podcasts, like a lot of true crime podcasts. But what they do in true crime podcasts that I didn't do in the book is they repeat things a lot.
Yeah.
And readers get quite bored if you repeat things all the
Yes.
time. And
Yes.
you have to trust your reader to remember little details. So
Yes.
I didn't like summarize the case at the start of every podcast episode, which is what they do. But I
Yes.
did try and make it as dramatic as possible. So yeah, I love listening to the true crime podcast and getting a real flavor for how different pieces of information are introduced and how different interviews might take place. So yeah, it was really great fun. I think it's just a case of when you're writing in a transcript format, the challenge is getting those twists and reveals to land
Mm,
brilliantly and to land and to do the best they can, because really all that's happening is one person is talking and then the next person is talking and the next person is talking. Like how you develop and put in the reveals to make them land dramatically is really, really hard. So that took quite a lot of time to really get that language and
yeah.
those scenes correct.
Yeah. Is there a particular true crime podcast or YouTube, investigator that you've come away thinking, "Oh, I'm gonna keep listening to
Oh,
their
I
stuff?"
do like to listen to a lot of them actually. I love Tortoise Shell Media, and
Mhm.
they do some fantastic podcasts, not just true crime. And Kendall, I think her name's Kendall Ray. She does a true crime one. I feel like I should know more because I went to CrimeCon in the summer and really got my geek on with like
Right.
listening to everybody. So yeah, there's just a huge amount, isn't there? I think it's finding that voice that you're happy to
Yeah.
listen to over and over again.
Awesome, awesome. So the other thing that's like quite difficult with writing psychological thrillers is making sure that you're keeping things fresh and interesting, and making sure each book has a twist that isn't similar to your other books. Um, how do you go about doing that? How do you go about keeping things fresh and trying to come up with new twists?
Yeah, it's a worry,
Mm,
and it really is a worry. I've written so many books now, and I write quite a lot of books every year. Like I write 3 or 2.5 books a year, so there's
mm,
it's constantly trying to think of new things. But what I always do is I look at what I want to be reading.
mhm,
So the great example is that I really wanted to read a book that was set within a very short space of time, which was almost a bit of a race from one place to another, like not
mm.
a competitive race, but like a
Yeah,
journey.
yeah,
And the tension that can come from you being stuck somewhere and having no money. And like we'd watched Race Across the World, which is on
yes.
BBC, and I really loved that. And I wanted to inject some sort of element of that into a thriller.
Yeah,
And so I that's what I decided to write as my next book, which is the one that's coming out in the summer, which I can talk more about nearer the time. But yeah,
yes.
I guess it's just to think of what I'm interested in and what is going to make me want to get up every morning and sit at my desk and write. And if
Yeah.
I'm interested and if I'm energetic and I'm motivated, that is going to come across in the story. And I think if I don't feel that way, I don't think it's going to create the best story that I can create.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. I'm also interested in how does real life, you kind of explained a little bit about this with the teacher's secret, but how in other ways does your life influence and impact your storytelling, whether it's your characters or an actual bit of like a narrative arc? How does that
Yeah,
work?
absolutely got the best example for you, Luke. So my daughter used to go to gymnastics on a Wednesday night, and my son, I would make him come with me. And every week, without fail, he'll be like, "Why do I have to go? Why can't I just stay in the house?
Yeah.
What's the worst that could happen to me?" And I was like, "Okay, what's the worst that could happen to you? Let me tell you. I'm going to write a story." And so it became the story of an anxious mother who left her 11-year-old daughter, and made it a daughter because there's higher stakes with a daughter, home alone for 20 minutes while she went to collect her other child from a club. But 20 minutes became 5 hours when she got stuck in a traffic accident on the road.
Ooh.
She then got home at midnight. I was absolutely frantically couldn't get hold of the child she'd left behind.
Yeah.
She got home at midnight, raced through the house, and her daughter is asleep in bed. And she's like, "Oh my God, okay, fine. Nothing bad happened. It's all okay. Never doing that again." But the next morning, it becomes very clear that something terrible happened in those 5 hours while she was out of the village. And she can't get her daughter to talk to her. She
Mm,
won't tell her anything. And that whole story came from me wanting to tell my son why I couldn't leave him home alone. And also the thing, that frustration that you have as a parent when your child gets to an age where they realize they can withhold information from you and there's
mm,
nothing you can do about it.
yeah.
You're like, "Just tell me what's wrong." And they're like, "No." You're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay." And that story is called Safe at Home, and that came out a couple of years ago. So that is the
Yes.
best example. And
I love
those
that.
kind of things happen all the time.
I love that. So aside from crime books being a thrilling fun romp, um, Do you think that do they have a different sort of an additional role, you think, in terms of commentary on society or anything? Or do you think there is a different kind of, are there two types of crime books? One that maybe has commentary and one that's just like maybe pure fun, or, yeah.
There is a way to be both. I think my priority as an author is to be an entertainer. So,
Mm,
what I want to do is to be the person who is making someone stay up late, turning pages when they know they should be asleep. And I'm the person who is the reason they're not checking their phone because they're so interested. But
yeah.
there's a way to deliver that while also highlighting, if you want to, certain things that are happening in the world. And the prime example is The Ugly Truth, which came out in hardback last year and just came out in paperback. That is the story of, again, it's told through a Netflix documentary, and it's a story of a very famous woman in England who disappears.
Mm,
And her father tells the country that she's safe and well and being well cared for, but the best friend and the ex-husband are saying, no, she's being kidnapped. And videos are released that show she's being held against her will. And it became an entertaining story about what's really happening to this woman and whose side are you on? Are you on the side of Melanie, or are you on the side of her dad,
mm,
Sir Peter? And it was so much fun to write. And there was a lot of Twitter commentary and all these different people weighing in on a story that they really have nothing to do with.
yeah.
But what it also showed you was how women are treated by the tabloids and by the media in this country and, in fact, the world.
Yeah.
And it loosely looked at some of the issues that have come across for people like Britney Spears, like Paris Hilton,
Mm,
and some of their stories. And so when you're reading it, it feels very real because it's
yeah.
drawing on some of the celebrity details and salacious gossip that we all remember.
Yeah.
And it's a real look at how awful it
Mm,
can make the situation when you are being hounded by the media. So it was so much fun to write, and what I hope is an entertaining story, but it also carries quite an
yeah.
important message about how we as a society treat our celebrities.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because while you can blame the tabloids for doing it, why are they doing it? And the reason is because they know that that's going to sell the papers and the stories that we are then looking at. So we just obviously a terrible society.
Yes. Well, we have our dark sides. That is
Yeah, and
that's
I'm
for
as
sure.
equal to blame as the next person because I absolutely love a good celebrity gossip story. So I'm just as terrible as the next person.
I mean, they have their moments. They have their moments of intrigue. I can't deny that either. So last thing I want to kind of talk about is branding. So you have two sides. There's Laura
Yeah.
North and there's LC North.
Yes.
Tell me about the difference. What spurred this split?
So the difference is that LC North writes book club thrillers told in different mediums, so podcasts and Netflix documentaries and mixed media.
Mm,
And they are stories which are designed for you to want to then turn to the next person and talk to them about the book and things.
right.
So that's why they're called a book club thriller.
Mm,
And Lauren North writes the more standard psychological thrillers that are hopefully really entertaining, but are stories of everyday situations that you could imagine yourself in, I think, hopefully to some extent, apart
yeah.
from when reviewers tell me it was unrealistic, which is fine, I can take it.
Just fine, you
So,
sons of bitches.
yeah, so so that's the real difference, and it came about because I am quite a quick writer,
Mm,
and I had fulfilled my contract with Transworld for my fourth psychological thriller, which was All the Wicked Games, and I had quite a while to spare before we really needed to talk about the next deal. And so I was like, oh, well, I'll write something for fun. I'll write something that I want to write. So I
mhm,
really thought about what it was I wanted to write, and I'd just seen a documentary, a BBC Panorama documentary about the Dubai princess who was being held prisoner by her father. And I
mm,
was like, I want to write something about this. And so I was like, and I'm going to do it really differently. So
mm,
I just wrote it quite quickly, and it was just quite a bit of fun. But then Transworld, fortunately for me, wanted it as well. But they said, but it's so different. What if we changed your name? So
mhm,
we agreed that we would change my name, and that was great. But then I still wanted to write as Laura North because I write quite quickly. I love to write more than one book a year, otherwise I'd just be really quite bored.
Mhm.
So I was then sort of talked about, well, how would we do it? And we all decided, the publisher and me and my agent, that the best thing would be if they focused on Elsie North,
Mhm.
and I then took Lauren North and took her somewhere else. And I was just really, really lucky. I had a publisher who I hadn't signed with back in 2018 and who I still really loved.
Right.
And so I said to my agent at the time, do you think you could just ask them if they're still interested?
Mm.
And they were, luckily, and that was Booker. So I just feel really lucky to be working with them as well. So it's great for me. It means I've got two different types of books, so it keeps me quite entertained, and I'm doing different things each time. So I'm just now I've written 2 Lauren Norths back to back, which are out this year, and now I'm just writing my next Elsie North book. So yeah,
Awesome.
it's good fun. It's busy. It's really
I
busy.
can imagine. I can imagine. Fantastic. Okay, the last thing I want to talk to you about then is podcasting, because you, for a while, you were doing a podcast. You were a co-host on the In Suspense podcast.
Yes.
I'm curious about kind of what started your journey with that particular podcast and where you're at with it now.
So In Suspense was Leslie Cara's brainchild. It was during lockdown, and she was like, do you fancy doing this with me? Because I just really like the idea of still reaching out to authors and
Mm,
reaching out to our community while we're all stuck at home. And I was like,
mm,
yes, of course I do. This is brilliant, especially with someone like Leslie Cara as your
mhm.
co-host, who is just such a dynamite of a storyteller. So I was really, really excited to do it. And we divided up the tasks, and I sort of learned how to do editing. And so that was quite entertaining. And yeah, we ran it for 2 years, just the two of us. And then we brought on Nikki Smith, who's another fantastic thriller writer, as another co-host, just because we were all feeling it was taking up quite a lot of our time, so we needed
Yeah.
to distribute it a bit. And then sadly, I decided last season that I needed to step away completely because I had too much writing to do. So I made the choice that I
Yeah.
wanted to focus on my books, and I really loved the 3 years I worked on In Suspense, and it's still going, and it's still a
Yes.
fantastic podcast. It's for readers and writers of crime fiction and suspense, and it's a really fabulous look into, a lot like you, behind the scenes of stories and the people who write them. So
Yeah.
definitely check it out.
Yeah. What do you have one or two kind of, favorite memories from doing In Suspense?
I just probably my lasting memory is always just when Leslie or I like completely fluffed up what we were supposed to be saying and forgot like the person's name as we were interviewing them, and luckily I was editing, so I could just chop it out. I mean, we left a few little funny bits in there, but
Yes.
mostly sometimes I couldn't even remember the name of the podcast. I'd be like, "Hello and welcome to." And I'm there was lots of funny moments. I think just having developed, I was friends with Leslie, but we became so much closer through doing
Yeah.
In Suspense. So I think having those lasting friendships with the women is probably my biggest thing to come away from it. So
Oh,
really, really
fantastic.
happy. Plus having met loads of authors as well, which is brilliant.
True.
So
True. That's always a lot of fun. Well, Lauren, this was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed having you on and talking about everything.
well, just 1 second, Luke. Can you talk us through the shrine behind you? Because you seem to have like an eagle
I
and
do.
some cups.
Well,
So this is
this
some sort of worshipping thing going on here, is it?
this is the Maltese Falcon
Oh, I
from
see. It was
the
you that
Maltese
stole it.
Falcon from
Yeah.
the old-timey film.
Yes.
This little triangular object is a piece of nerd stuff. It's the crystal that makes the Fortress of Solitude in Superman in the TV show
Oh, I
Smallville.
see. Yeah.
That is the Holy Grail from Indiana Jones.
Ah, yes, I should have recognized it.
And then that is the Grail Diary right there,
Oh, I
which
see.
David Fennell, a friend and author, put me on to the diary. He's like, "Oh, I bought this diary that's an imitation of the Grail Diary off of Etsy." I'm like, "I gotta find it." That is some whiskey that I
I
don't
was
drink.
wondering what it might be. I didn't know if it was like imitation
Nope.
drink from something, but Flash Gordon.
It's monkey shoulder whiskey that I thought, oh, I want to have some whiskey behind me, and it's just been sitting there. And what's funny is I can see that it's gone down. It initially it was up here, but like it kind of disappears after a while. Then I
Expected.
have some RoboCop and Ed 209
Yeah,
behind me,
cool.
Blade Runner poster, a bunch of crime books. These are some of my favorite crime books. This is Raymond Chandler right here.
Yeah.
Then Dashiell Hammett and James Crumley, all kind of hard-boiled American writers. I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell. So this is his collection. Like he wrote The Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is all
Yeah.
about looking at myth and connecting stories across cultures and stuff. Then these are just like some general short stories collections. Oh, and the scripts for the first 2 seasons of Succession.
Cool.
And then Robert B. Parker over there, and some Spider-Man action figures behind me. Yeah, it's
I love it.
it's that's like a snapshot. If you want to get to know me, just like look at my
I do, and
background,
that's really cool.
and there you go. And it's all kinds of nerdy and bookie-ish sort of things.
So have you got 60 seconds just to tell us what you're working on at the moment?
I do have 60 seconds.
And
At the
only
moment,
60 seconds.
gone in 60 seconds. Yeah. So I guess at the time when this comes out, this will be I just finished a PhD, so at the moment I'm kind of chilling a little bit. But I'm working on a new book. That one of my books is with my agent at the moment, and that's where we're seeing where that goes. But I'm also working on a new one. That's the one with my agent is my PhD novel, which is a historical thriller. Set in 1920s Edinburgh, which is I really like, and it'd be great if it came out, but we'll see. I don't know if it's commercial enough. It might not be. We'll see. And at the moment I'm working on a contemporary thriller that probably has more of a commercial edge to it. That's kind of if I was to compare it to something on TV or what has been on TV, maybe something like Luther. It's kind of in that kind of vein.
Yeah.
It's London and a little bit gritty, but also I think quite commercial and fun. So that's the main thing that I'm working on outside of just other things. Once you finish a PhD and like you're done, you're like, what do I do now? So there's a lot of at the moment. There's also a lot of kind of refocusing and stuff that's happening at the moment.
And
but,
you've just got a little girl, so you just
and I
had a
have
little
yes,
girl,
we have a
so
little
it's
baby.
busy.
Yes, so it's lots of things going on, and I got a couple like little shorts coming out this year, I think, which will be cool, and I'm not sure if I'm going to do this or not. I have some some of my original books that are under a different name. Might get a facelift and might get reissued. We'll see.
Oh, so cool. Oh,
So a
well,
few
good luck
things.
with that.
Thank you.
Yes, busy. You're a busy bee.
I try to be. Otherwise, I'd be like you. I'd be bored. I got to keep going.
Yeah, it's not good.
Where can people find you on social media?
Well, they can often find me on Twitter for most of the day because despite writing quite a lot of books, I seem to also spend quite a lot of time scrolling. So I am at Lauren_C_North on X, I should say, not Twitter, and
I refuse
Facebook.
to call it X.
I know, but we've got to adapt because it hasn't died. We all thought it might. We all jumped over to Blue Sky, but it is still going, and we're all still really on X more than Blue Sky, if we're all honest.
Yes.
And so we just have to accept it now. I've decided that 2024 is the year I will call it X when I remember. What I'll do is I'll call it Twitter, and then I'll be like, oh, I mean X. And I'm on Instagram as well as Lauren_C_North. So you can find me in all those places.
Nice. Do you think because you've brought it up, do you think Blue Sky is ever gonna like take off? Because I'm not gonna lie, I had it and I
we
deleted
were both on it a lot, weren't we? We were there at the beginning. We were giving it our best, trying to build out. I got to 1,000 followers. I was really going for it. Only if X dies, I would say. I think we're all so established on X, and it has all settled down now. So I think possibly not at the moment, because I don't think it offers anything other than what X offers. In fact, it offers slightly less at the moment, but I know they're developing it, and I love it, and I hope it does take off. But I don't think there's space in our lives for both. In fact, and Threads again was the same. Like we all jumped on that, and now we're all stuck with it because we're part of Instagram.
So
Haven't been on
true.
that for 6 months.
Actually, you can deactivate your threads without
Oh.
affecting your
Oh,
Instagram
can
account.
you? They tell
Yes.
you can't, don't they? Like, delete
At
this
the
and delete
beginning, you couldn't.
Instagram.
At the
No.
beginning,
Oh,
you couldn't.
okay.
Now you
I
can.
just ignore it, to be honest. Like, I mean, I struggle like with all. There's so many things to look on, and we all have our special places that we like to go and hang out for the
Yes.
most part, I think. So
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I'm mostly, I like you. I'm mostly on X. So yeah, go find Lauren on Twitter stroke X. Um, if you're watching this on YouTube, in the description there are links to her books that you can go and purchase,
oh,
and
thank
links to
you.
Lauren, your website. So everyone, if you're listening on Spotify or Apple or watching on YouTube, there are links in the description. So go find Lauren's books, and or LC books. You won't be disappointed. Yeah, this was a lot of fun, Lauren, and I look forward to
Oh,
having you
thanks so
back
much.
on
It's
in the
just
future.
flown by. Thank you
I
so
know.
much, Luke. Have a great week. Thank you so
You,
much for having me.
you're welcome. Thanks for listening, everyone, and I'll see you next week. Adios.
The Secret Circle.